The mountain man heard her whimpering before he saw her, a sound so faint against the howling December wind that he almost convinced himself it was just another trick of the Wyoming wilderness. Colton Kincaid had been tracking an elk through the Medicine Bow Mountains since dawn, his broad shoulders hunched against the bitter cold that swept down from the peaks. But something in that distant cry made him abandon his prey and push through the thick pine forest toward the wagon trail below. What he found there made his blood run cold for reasons that had nothing to do with the weather. A woman stumbled through the snow in a thin cotton dress, her feet bare and bleeding, leaving crimson footprints in the white powder. Her dark hair had come loose from its pins and whipped around her face, and her lips had taken on a dangerous blue tint. She moved like someone caught in a nightmare, putting one foot mechanically in front of the other, no longer seeming to feel the pain or the cold or anything at all. Colton crashed through the last line of trees and onto the trail, his 7-foot frame and massive build making enough noise that the woman's head jerked up. Her eyes were green, he noticed, even dulled by cold and exhaustion. Wide green eyes that looked at him with more resignation than fear. "Please," she whispered, and then her knees buckled. He caught her before she hit the ground, his muscled arms cradling her small frame against his chest. She was light as a child, all bones and fragile skin, and cold as the snow itself. Up close, he could see the bruises on her arms, the split in her lip that had only recently stopped bleeding, the finger-shaped marks on her throat. Without hesitation, Colton sat down right there in the middle of the trail and began unlacing his thick leather boots. His socks were wool, thick and warm from his own body heat, and he pulled them off too. The woman tried to protest when she realized what he was doing, but her chattering teeth made the words incomprehensible. "Hush now," he said, his voice rough from weeks of disuse. He lived alone in these mountains, and there was rarely call for conversation. "Your feet will be lost to frostbite if we do not warm them now." He rubbed each foot carefully, checking for the telltale white patches that would indicate the flesh was already dying. She had been lucky, if you could call any part of her situation lucky. The damage was bad but not irreversible. He worked his thick socks onto her small feet, then his boots, stuffing the toes with strips he tore from his own shirt to make them fit. "I can walk," she tried to say, but he was already standing, lifting her into his arms as easily as he might lift his rifle. "Not another step," he said. "My cabin is 3 miles north. Can you tell me what happened?" She was quiet for so long he thought she might have lost consciousness, but then she spoke, her voice barely audible against his chest. "My husband, former husband, he found me in Laramie. I ran, he followed. He caught me on the road and took everything. My shoes, my coat, my bag with all my money. He said if I was going to leave him, I could walk home to whatever family would still take me back. He knew they would not. He knew they cast me out when I married him against their wishes. He knew I had nowhere to go." Colton felt a rage building in his chest that burned hotter than any fire. "Where is he now?" "Gone back to Laramie, I suppose. He thinks I will die out here. I thought I would die out here." She tilted her head back to look at him, really look at him, taking in his long dark hair tied back with a leather cord, the thick beard that covered his jaw, the shoulders that strained against his buckskin jacket. "Who are you, Colton Kincaid?" "I trap these mountains, sell the furs in Reno or Laramie when I need supplies. Live alone up here most of the year." He adjusted his grip on her, his powerful arms never wavering despite the distance. "And you are Winona Nash. Willie, my mother called me back when she still spoke to me." Her eyes were starting to close. "I was trying to reach Virginia City. I heard there was work for women there, even women with reputations." "Stay awake," Colton commanded, giving her a gentle shake. I need you to stay awake and talking until we get inside where it is warm. Tell me about Laramie. How long since you left? She forced her eyes open. 3 days. I was traveling with a merchant caravan, but then Jacob appeared. He paid the driver to leave me behind, and the man agreed. Everyone agreed. No one crosses Jacob Nash. He has friends, important friends. He works for the railroad, and that makes him untouchable. No man is untouchable, Colton said grimly. Willie gave a bitter little laugh. You do not know Jacob. He is charming to everyone who matters. The bruises he gave me were always where people could not see. When I finally ran 6 months ago, I went to the sheriff. Jacob convinced him I was hysterical, that I had fallen, that I was prone to fits and delusions. His friends backed his story. I was the one they nearly locked up. They walked in silence for a while, Colton's long strides eating up the distance despite the snow. The trail climbed steadily, winding through dense forest that provided some shelter from the wind. His cabin sat in a small valley, protected on 3 sides by rock outcroppings and stands of pine. Smoke should have been rising from the chimney, but he had been gone since before dawn. Why do you live up here alone? Willie asked, clearly fighting to stay conscious. A man like you must have family somewhere. Had family, had a wife once and a son. The words came out flat, emotionless. He had practiced saying them that way, removing the pain until they were just facts. Cholera took them both in '68. I came to the mountains after that. Did not see much point in staying in civilization when everything I loved was gone from it. I am sorry, Willie whispered. It was 7 years ago. The grief is quieter now. He looked down at her. But it never fully leaves. I suspect you understand that after what you have endured. Yes, she said simply. The cabin finally came into view, a solid structure built from logs Colton had felled and notched himself. It was small but well made, with a stone chimney and real glass windows he had hauled up from Laramie. Smoke would soon rise from that chimney again. He kicked the door open and brought Willie inside, setting her carefully on the thick bearskin that covered his bed. The cabin was a single room, dominated by the stone fireplace on one wall, with the bed in the corner, a rough table with 2 chairs, shelves lined with supplies, and his traps and tools hanging from pegs along the walls. Furs were stretched on frames, waiting to be cleaned and cured. Colton worked quickly, building up the fire until flames roared and heat began to spread through the space. He filled a pot with snow and set it to melt, then pulled out his medical supplies, such as they were. Whiskey for cleaning wounds, clean cloth for bandages, herbs he had traded from the Shoshone for their healing properties. Willie watched him move around the cabin with practiced efficiency, this giant of a man who somehow made the small space seem even smaller. His arms were thick with muscle, his hands large and calloused but surprisingly gentle as he prepared everything she would need. "Let me see your feet," he said, kneeling before the bed. She hesitated, then extended one leg. Colton carefully removed his boot and sock, examining her foot in the firelight. The skin was raw and torn, with deep cuts from rocks and ice. He cleaned each wound with warm water and whiskey, working methodically despite her sharp intakes of breath. When he was satisfied they were clean, he rubbed a salve into the damaged skin and wrapped each foot in soft cloth. "You will heal," he pronounced, "but you cannot walk for at least a week, maybe 2. You will stay here until you are recovered." "I cannot impose," Willie started to protest. "You have no choice," Colton said bluntly. "The next settlement is Reno, and that is 3 days' walk when you are healthy and have proper shoes. In your condition, you would die before you made it 5 miles. You stay here. When you are healed, I will take you wherever you wish to go." Willie looked around the cabin again, really seeing it this time. It was sparse but clean, everything in its place. A man's refuge, not a home. What about my former husband? He might come back looking. Let him, Colton said, and something in his voice made Willie believe that Jacob Nash would regret any such visit. Now you need food and warm liquids. When did you last eat? Before Jacob found me. So 3 days, I suppose. Colton muttered something under his breath that might have been a curse and turned to his supplies. He had venison from a deer he had taken the previous week, and he cut thick slices to fry in his pan. There were beans he had been soaking, potatoes from his root cellar, coffee that he made strong and sweet with precious sugar. Willie tried to sit up to help, but Colton pointed a commanding finger at her. You stay in that bed and rest. I can manage a simple meal. She sank back against the furs, too tired to argue. Her body was starting to thaw in the warmth of the fire, and with the thawing came pain. Her feet throbbed, her bruises ached, her split lip burned. But more than the physical pain was the overwhelming exhaustion that seemed to sink into her very bones. "Why are you helping me?" she asked quietly. "You do not know me. I could be anyone, have done anything." Colton paused in his cooking, his broad back to her. "Because 7 years ago, when my wife and son were dying, neighbors brought food and sat with us, and did what they could, even though there was nothing to be done against the cholera. Because human decency should not require explanation. And because no woman deserves what that man did to you, and I will be damned before I turn you back out into the cold." Willie felt tears prick her eyes, the first tears she had allowed herself since Jacob had abandoned her. "Thank you," she whispered. "No thanks needed," Colton said gruffly, but she could see the tips of his ears go red above his beard. He brought her food on a tin plate, and she ate slowly, her stomach protesting the richness after days of emptiness. The venison was perfectly cooked, the beans seasoned with wild herbs, the coffee strong enough to chase away the last of the cold that had settled into her core. Colton ate standing up, leaning against the mantel, watching the fire. "How old are you?" Willie asked between bites. 32. "And you?" 24. "I married Jacob when I was 18, 6 years ago. I thought I was so grown up, so sure I knew better than my parents what was best for me." She laughed bitterly. "I was a fool. You were young. We all do foolish things when we are young." Colton finished his own food and took her empty plate. "You should sleep now. Real sleep in a warm place. You are safe here." Willie wanted to argue, to insist she could not impose, but her eyes were already closing. The warmth, the food, the safety, it all combined to drag her down into sleep. She was dimly aware of Colton spreading another fur over her, banking the fire, moving quietly around the cabin. Then consciousness faded entirely. She woke once in the deep night to find Colton sitting in one of the chairs he had pulled near the fire, his rifle across his knees, watching the door. Guarding her. She fell back asleep feeling safer than she had in years. The next days fell into a pattern. Colton rose before dawn to check his trap lines, always back before Willie woke to stoke the fire and prepare breakfast. He changed the bandages on her feet, applied fresh salve, and monitored her healing with careful attention. He was gentle despite his size, his large hands steady and sure. Willie began to help where she could, insisting on mending his clothes, preparing vegetables, doing anything that could be done sitting down. Colton protested at first, but she wore him down with determination. She needed to feel useful, needed to earn her keep even in this temporary refuge. They talked while they worked, tentative at first, then with growing ease. Willie told him about growing up in Philadelphia, the daughter of a merchant who had made good in the dry goods trade. She had been educated, learned to read and write and cipher, taught to paint watercolors and play piano like any proper young lady. Then she had met Jacob Nash at a church social, been swept away by his charm and confidence, and thrown it all away to marry him against her family's wishes. "They saw what I could not," she said, hands busy darning a hole in one of Colton's wool socks. "My father said Jacob was too smooth, too quick with easy answers. My mother said his eyes were cold when he thought no one was watching. But I was in love, or thought I was, and would not listen. They told me if I married him, I was no longer their daughter. I thought they would relent after the wedding, but they never did. I wrote letters for years, but they all came back unopened." Colton listened, whittling a new handle for a knife, the wood curling away in long strips beneath his blade. "What changed? What made you finally leave?" Willie was quiet for a long time. "He started talking about wanting children. I realized I could not bring a child into that house, could not watch him raise a son to be like him or a daughter to accept what I had accepted. The thought of it made me physically ill. So I started hiding money, just pennies at first, then larger amounts. It took me 2 years to save enough to run. I waited until he left on a business trip to Cheyenne, then I took a train to Laramie and disappeared. But he found you. He found me. I had been doing well, working as a seamstress, renting a room from a widow. I thought I was free. Then one day I saw him on the street, talking to the sheriff. Our eyes met and I knew. I ran that same night, but I did not run fast enough or far enough." Colton's jaw tightened. "The man is a coward and a bully. He will not find you here." "How can you be sure?" "Because no one comes up this high in winter except trappers and mountain men, and we all know to respect each other's territory. Because this valley is hidden and hard to find if you do not know where to look. And because I give you my word that I will keep you safe." He looked up from his whittling, his dark eyes intense. "And I keep my word." Willie believed him. Everything about Colton Kincaid spoke of reliability, of strength not just physical but moral. He was a man who said what he meant, and meant what he said. In a world that had shown her how weak words could be, how easily promises were broken, Colton's simple certainty was like bedrock. As the days passed and Willie's feet healed, she began to notice other things about her rescuer. The way he smiled when a chickadee landed on the windowsill, the care he took with his tools and weapons, the softness in his eyes when he thought she was not looking. He was lonely, she realized, desperately lonely, though he bore it with the same stoic strength he applied to everything else. She noticed the way his muscles moved beneath his shirts when he worked, the broadness of his shoulders, the surprising grace of his movements for such a large man. She noticed the gray that threaded through his dark hair and beard, the lines at the corners of his eyes that spoke of both laughter and sorrow. She noticed that despite living alone in the wilderness, he was scrupulously clean, bathing regularly in heated water, keeping his hair and beard trimmed. And she noticed the way he looked at her when he thought she was not paying attention, with a hunger and longing that he quickly schooled into friendly concern. 2 weeks after he had found her in the snow, Willie stood for the first time without pain. Her feet had healed cleanly, the cuts closed into pink scars that would fade with time. She took a few experimental steps around the cabin, then a few more, her face breaking into a smile. "I can walk," she said, delighted. Colton looked up from the fur he was stretching and smiled back, genuine pleasure lighting his features. "That is good news. How does it feel?" "A bit tender, but nothing like before. I think in another week I will be ready to travel if you are still willing to guide me." The smile faded from Colton's face, replaced by something more complicated. "Of course. Where do you want to go? Virginia City like you originally planned?" Willie hesitated. The truth was, she had been thinking about this question for days and still had no good answer. "I do not know. I have no family, no friends I can impose upon, no money for a new start. Virginia City was just a destination because I heard they needed workers, but I have no particular desire to end up there." "You could stay here," Colton said, then immediately looked like he regretted the words. "I mean, until spring at least. The weather will only get worse before it gets better. Travel in these mountains in January and February is deadly even for experienced outdoorsmen. Come spring, the journey will be easier, and you will have had time to decide where you truly want to go." Willie's heart began to beat faster. "I could not impose for so long. You have already done so much. It would not be an imposition." Colton set down the fur and turned to face her fully. "I have enjoyed having company again. The cabin feels less empty with someone else in it. And truthfully, I would worry every day if you left now, wondering if you made it safely, if that bastard found you again, if you had enough to eat and a warm place to sleep." "You barely know me," Willie said softly. "I know enough." He took a step closer, then seemed to think better of it and stopped. "I know you are brave and resourceful. I know you would rather suffer than accept help, but you are wise enough to accept it anyway. I know you hum while you work, always the same tune, something your mother taught you. I know you are kind, because you feed scraps to the birds even though we have limited supplies. I know you have been hurt badly but have not let it make you cruel or bitter. That is more than enough." Willie felt tears sting her eyes. "You are a good man, Colton Kincaid." "I am a simple man who knows loneliness when he sees it." His voice was rough. "Stay, please, at least until spring." Willie knew she should refuse. She should insist on leaving, on making her own way, on not becoming dependent on yet another man's goodwill. But the thought of leaving this warm cabin, of walking back out into the cold world where Jacob might find her, of saying goodbye to Colton, made her chest ache in a way that had nothing to do with her healing injuries. "Until spring, then," she agreed. "But I earn my keep. I cook, I clean, I mend, I help however I can. I will not be a burden." "Deal," Colton said, and his smile could have warmed the cabin without any fire at all. Winter deepened around them, but inside the cabin, a different kind of warmth grew. They fell into an easy partnership, working side by side on the endless tasks required to survive in the mountains. Willie learned to cure furs and render fat, to set snares for rabbits, and identify edible plants even in winter. Colton taught her to shoot his rifle, standing behind her to adjust her aim, his solid presence making her feel protected rather than trapped. She learned his moods, the quiet he fell into when the anniversary of his family's death approached, the fierce concentration he brought to any task, the dry humor that emerged when he relaxed. He learned hers, the nightmares that sometimes woke her gasping, the way she flinched from sudden movements even though she knew he would never hurt her, the brilliant smile that transformed her face when something genuinely delighted her. They were careful not to touch unnecessarily, both aware of the propriety they were already stretching by living alone together. But sometimes their hands brushed reaching for the same tool, or their shoulders bumped passing in the small space, and the contact felt electric. Christmas came, and Colton surprised Willie by producing a small package wrapped in cloth. Inside was a pair of snowshoes he had crafted himself, sized perfectly for her feet, with intricate leather bindings and careful construction. "So you can walk outside without sinking," he explained, suddenly shy. "I thought you might be getting tired of being cooped up in here." Willie ran her fingers over the smooth wood, touched beyond words. "They are beautiful. I have nothing to give you in return." "Your company is gift enough," Colton said simply. Willie had been working on her own surprise, though, and she pulled it out from where she had hidden it beneath the bed. It was a shirt she had sewn from the softest deerskin. Using skills her mother had taught her and techniques she had learned from watching Colton work leather. She had decorated the shoulders and cuffs with quill work in a geometric pattern, trading some of her mending work to a Shoshone woman who sometimes visited Colton to trade for the quills and instruction on how to use them. Colton held the shirt like it was made of spun gold, his large hands trembling slightly. "You made this. You needed a good shirt. All of yours are worn thin. Try it on." He stripped off his current shirt unselfconsciously, and Willie tried not to stare at the broad expanse of his chest, the muscles that rippled beneath his skin, the scars that marked his ribs and shoulder. The new shirt fit perfectly, skimming his powerful frame, the quillwork bright against the pale leather. "It is the finest thing I have ever owned," Colton said hoarsely. "Thank you." They stood there in the firelight, looking at each other, and something shifted between them. The awareness that had been building for weeks crystallized into something sharper, more urgent. Colton took a step toward Willie, then another, giving her every chance to move away. She did not move away. "Willie," he said, her name a question and a prayer. "Yes," she whispered, though he had not actually asked anything. His kiss was gentle despite his size, tentative, giving her control. Willie rose on her toes to meet him, her hands finding the soft leather of his new shirt, then sliding up to his shoulders. He tasted like coffee and smoke and something wild, and when his arms came around her, careful of his strength, she felt safer than she ever had in her life. They broke apart slowly, Colton resting his forehead against hers. "I have wanted to do that for weeks," he admitted. "I know." "I wanted you to." Willie smiled up at him. "I was starting to think you never would. I did not want to presume. After what you have been through, I thought perhaps you would never want a man to touch you again." Willie considered this seriously. "I think I will always carry some scars from my marriage, but you are not Jacob and I am not the same frightened girl who let him control her. When you touch me, I feel cherished, not possessed. There is a difference." "There is a world of difference," Colton agreed. He cupped her face in his large hands, his thumbs stroking her cheekbones. "You are precious to me, Willie. I never thought I would feel this way about anyone again after Sarah died. But you have brought light back into my life, warmth into this cold cabin. I am falling in love with you, and I needed you to know that, even if you cannot feel the same." Willie's heart felt so full she thought it might burst. "I love you too. I think I started falling the moment you gave me your boots without a second thought, when you carried me through the snow like I weighed nothing. You are everything Jacob was not, everything I did not know I needed." They kissed again, longer this time, with growing confidence and passion. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Colton stepped back and ran a hand through his long hair. "I want to do this right," he said. "Court you properly, not just live in sin because we are snowed in together. When spring comes, I will take you to Reno and marry you in front of a preacher and witnesses if you will have me." "That is months away," Willie pointed out, her eyes dancing. "I am aware." Colton's voice was strained. "It will be the longest winter of my life." Willie laughed and pulled him down for another kiss. "We will manage. And yes, when spring comes, I will marry you, Colton Kincaid. I will marry you and stay with you in these mountains and build a life here if that is what you want." "It is all I want," he said fervently. They spent the evening talking about the future, making plans. Colton described how they could expand the cabin, adding a second room for children when they came, building a proper barn for animals. Willie talked about planting a garden in the spring, about learning to preserve food for the long winters, about teaching any children they had to read and write. It was a simple life they planned, but it felt rich with possibility. That night, they pushed the two chairs together near the fire and sat wrapped in furs, Willie tucked against Colton's broad chest, his arms around her. They watched the flames and talked until they both dozed off, content in each other's presence. The pattern of their days continued, but now with casual touches, with kisses stolen while cooking or working, with endearments that grew from shy to confident. Colton called her his heart, his light. Willie called him her mountain, her strength. They were sickeningly sweet with each other, and neither cared. January brought deep snow that buried the cabin to the windowsills. They spent days inside, working on projects to pass the time. Colton taught Willie to carve, and she proved to have a steady hand and an eye for detail. She made wooden spoons and bowls, getting better with each piece. He worked on a cradle, not saying what it was for, but both of them knowing, hoping. They talked about everything and nothing. Colton spoke more in those weeks than he had in the previous 7 years, telling Willie about his childhood in Ohio, his journey west, his work as a logger before he became a trapper. Willie told him about Philadelphia, about her society friends who had abandoned her when she married Jacob, about the books she missed reading. "I have books," Colton said, surprised. "Not many, but a few. I did not think you would be interested." He pulled down a wooden box from a high shelf and opened it reverently. Inside were 6 precious volumes, carefully wrapped against moisture and pests. Shakespeare's tragedies, a collection of poetry, a novel by Charles Dickens, the Bible, a natural history of North America, and surprisingly, a book of fairy tales. "That one was for my son," Colton said softly, touching the book of fairy tales. "I used to read to him every night. I could not bear to leave it behind when I came to the mountains." Willie took his hand and squeezed. "What was his name?" "Thomas." "Tommy. He was 4 years old with his mother's blue eyes and my dark hair. He loved stories about knights and dragons. Every stick became a sword in his hands." Colton's voice was thick with memory. "Sarah was pregnant with our second when the cholera came. I lost them all within a week. The baby was born too early, a daughter who never drew breath. We buried them together, all 3, in the cemetery outside Cincinnati." "I am so sorry," Willie whispered. "It feels right to talk about them with you," Colton said. "For a long time, I could not speak their names without breaking, but with you the memories are soft around the edges, still sad but not sharp. Is that wrong? To have moved past the worst of the grief? It is not wrong, it is healing." Willie leaned her head against his shoulder. "They would want you to be happy again." "Sarah would have liked you," Colton said with a small smile. "She was strong like you, unafraid of hard work. She would have approved of me choosing another woman with spine." They read together after that, sharing the books, trading passages back and forth. Willie's clear voice brought poetry alive, while Colton's deeper tones gave weight to Shakespeare's words. The fairy tales they saved for last, and when they finally read them, both cried a little for the son who had loved them. February brought a break in the weather, a string of clear days that allowed Colton to check his furthest trap lines. He was reluctant to leave Willie alone, but she insisted she would be fine for the day or two the journey would take. "I can shoot," she reminded him, hefting his second rifle, a lighter weight one he had traded for specifically so she could defend herself. "I can bar the door. I have food and firewood. I will be perfectly safe." "I do not like it," Colton grumbled, but he was already packing his gear. "I know, but your traps need tending and we need the furs to trade in spring. Go, I will be here when you return." He kissed her thoroughly before leaving, making her promise to fire 3 shots if there was any trouble, then 3 more. He would hear it even miles away and come running. Willie promised, touched by his concern but also confident in her ability to manage alone. The first day passed peacefully. Willie cleaned the cabin from top to bottom, organized their supplies, worked on her carving. She made stew for dinner and banked the fire before bed, sleeping lightly but undisturbed. The second day started the same, but around midday, Willie heard horses approaching. Her heart began to pound. No one should be up here in winter. Colton was on foot, checking traps. This was someone else. She grabbed the rifle and checked that it was loaded, then positioned herself where she could see out the window without being easily seen herself. Two men on horseback emerged from the tree line, both wrapped against the cold. They paused, looking at the cabin, and Willie's blood turned to ice. One of them was Jacob Nash. He looked thinner than she remembered, his handsome face harder, his movements sharp with anger. The man with him was a stranger, big and brutal-looking, with a deputy's star pinned to his coat. Jacob must have convinced some lawman that Willie needed to be brought back. "Winona," Jacob called out. "I know you are in there. Come out now, and I will not be angry. You have had your little adventure, but it is time to come home." Willie said nothing, her hand steady on the rifle despite her racing heart. "The man who took you will be arrested for kidnapping," Jacob continued, his voice taking on the reasonable tone he used when he wanted to sound rational. "You are confused, not thinking clearly. That is understandable after your ordeal, but I have a deputy here who will see you safely return to Laramie where you belong." Still, Willie remained silent. Jacob's reasonable tone cracked. "Damn it, Winona, do not make me come in there and drag you out. You know how that will end." The deputy said something too low for Willie to hear, and Jacob visibly forced himself to calm down. "We are not leaving without you. We can wait as long as necessary. The man who took you will return eventually, and then we will arrest him." "Is that what you want? To see him hang for kidnapping a married woman?" Willie's mind raced. She needed them gone before Colton returned, or Jacob's threat might come true. A woman's word meant little against a railroad man with connections, and they were living in a remote cabin alone together, which would look bad. But how could she make them leave? An idea came to her, risky but possible. She moved to the door, keeping the rifle trained on it, and called out, "I am not coming with you, Jacob. Our marriage is over. I have filed for divorce on grounds of cruelty." There was silence, then Jacob laughed. "You filed nothing. No lawyer would take your case without money, and you have none. You are still my wife, and you are coming home." "I am another man's wife now," Willie lied, hoping her voice carried conviction. "I married the mountain man in a ceremony conducted by a traveling preacher. I am Winona Kincaid now, not Winona Nash. You have no claim on me." "That is impossible," Jacob sputtered. "You cannot marry while already married. The second marriage is invalid. Our marriage was annulled by the church on grounds of your adultery and cruelty," Willie invented desperately. "The papers are filed in Laramie. Check if you do not believe me. I am free and legally married to another man. Leave now, or I will shoot you for trespassing." "She is lying," the deputy said loudly. "No annulment was filed. I checked before we came up here." Jacob's voice turned ugly. "I am coming in, Winona. And when I do, you will regret every moment of trouble you have caused me." Willie fired the rifle, aiming high, the shot splintering the doorframe near the top. "The next shot will not miss. Leave. Now." For a long moment she thought they would force their way in anyway. She had maybe 3 more shots before they could rush her while she reloaded, and she did not know if she could actually shoot a man, even Jacob. But she would try. She would do whatever it took to stay free. Then another voice called out, deep and furious, carrying clearly across the small valley. "You are trespassing on my land. Leave now, or I will gut you like the yellow-bellied curs you are." Willie's heart leaped. Colton had returned. He stood at the edge of the clearing, his rifle in his hands, his big body radiating menace. He must have heard the shot and run back, covering impossible distance in impossible time. His chest heaved with exertion, but his hands were steady. Jacob and the deputy turned their horses to face him. "This is legal business," the deputy called. "I am retrieving a runaway wife." "There is no wife here," Colton said, moving closer with smooth, predatory strides. Only my woman who is under my protection. She shot at you, which means you were threatening her. I am well within my rights to shoot to kill to defend my home and my woman. Do you want to test whether I am bluffing? Everything about Colton said he was not bluffing. He looked wild and dangerous, more bear than man, his dark eyes promising violence. The deputy's horse sidled nervously, picking up on its rider's fear. "Now see here," he started. "No, you see here," Colton cut him off. "This land is mine. This woman is mine. You have no authority up here, no jurisdiction. You are just a man with a gun on another man's property threatening his family. I have every right to kill you both and call it self-defense, so you have a choice. Turn around and leave or die in the snow. Makes no difference to me." He raised the rifle to his shoulder in a single smooth motion, sighting down the barrel. The deputy broke first, yanking his horse around. Jacob tried to hold his ground, his face mottled with rage, but his horse was already dancing backwards, spooked by the violence in the air. "This is not over, Winona," Jacob shouted. "You are my wife. You cannot just decide otherwise." "She decided the day you beat her," Colton called back. "She decided when you stole her shoes and left her to die in the snow. The only question now is whether you are smart enough to accept it. Come back up this mountain and you will not leave it. That is my promise." The deputy was already retreating down the trail. Jacob had no choice but to follow, though he kept looking back, his face twisted with impotent fury. They disappeared into the trees, and finally, Willie could breathe again. She dropped the rifle and sagged against the door. A moment later it opened and Colton was there, pulling her into his arms, his whole body shaking. "I heard the shot," he said hoarsely. "I thought you were hurt. I thought he had killed you. I have never run so fast in my life. I am fine. You came in time." Willie buried her face in his chest, inhaling his familiar scent of leather and pine and safety. "He believed I was your wife. I told him we were married, and he believed it." Colton pulled back to look at her. "Then let us make it truth. Now, today, we do not need a preacher or witnesses. We need only each other and our promises before God. Is that legal? It is common law. If we declare ourselves married and live as married, the law recognizes it. Not everyone has access to preachers in the wilderness." His dark eyes were intense. "Marry me, Willie, right now. Let me make you my wife in truth so no man can question it." Willie's heart was still racing, but now for a different reason. "Yes, yes, I will marry you." They stood in the doorway of the cabin, the mountains rising around them, the sky impossibly blue overhead. Colton took both her hands in his much larger ones and spoke in a voice that carried across the valley. "I, Colton Kincaid, take you, Winona Nash, to be my lawfully wedded wife. I promise to protect you, provide for you, cherish you, and honor you all the days of my life. I will be faithful in times of plenty and in times of hardship. I will stand between you and all harm. I will love you until death parts us, and beyond if such a thing is possible. This is my vow before God and these mountains." Willie's voice shook, but her words rang clear. "I, Winona Nash, take you, Colton Kincaid, to be my lawfully wedded husband. I promise to stand beside you, support you, honor you, and cherish you all the days of my life. I will be faithful in joy and in sorrow. I will make a home wherever we are together. I will love you with my whole heart for as long as I draw breath. This is my vow before God and these mountains." Colton produced a ring from his pocket, a simple gold band that had belonged to his mother. "I have carried this for years, never thinking I would have cause to give it to anyone. It would make me honored beyond measure if you would wear it." Willie held out her hand, steady now, and Colton slid the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, as if it had been made for her. By the power vested in me by the wilderness that has always been my church, I declare us husband and wife, Colton said. And may God have mercy on any man who tries to separate us. He kissed her then, deep and claiming his wife in truth now. Willie kissed him back with equal fervor. This mountain man who had saved her life and her heart, who had given her his boots and carried her when she could not walk, who had shown her what love was supposed to be. When they finally broke apart, both were crying, happy tears that froze on their cheeks in the winter air. "Come inside, husband," Willie said, testing out the word. "Anything you say, wife," Colton replied with a grin. They spent the rest of the day in celebration, just the two of them in their small cabin. Colton had brought back an elk from his trap line, and they roasted steaks in the fire, eating with their fingers and laughing at nothing and everything. They drank whiskey from tin cups and danced to music only they could hear, Colton's strong arms guiding Willie around the small space. As night fell, they made love for the first time, gentle and passionate and profound. Colton was patient, attentive, worshipping Willie's body with his hands and mouth until she cried out in pleasure. When they finally came together, it felt like the most natural thing in the world, like coming home. After, they lay tangled together in the furs, content and complete. "I love you," Willie whispered into the darkness. "I love you," Colton replied, his arms tightening around her. "Thank you for walking into my life even if it was the worst day of yours. Thank you for staying. Thank you for choosing me. Thank you for seeing me when I was invisible," Willie said. "Thank you for giving me your boots, for carrying me, for keeping me safe, for loving me." They fell asleep like that, husband and wife, two broken people who had found in each other the strength to be whole again. The rest of winter passed in a haze of happiness. They continued their work, but now with the easy intimacy of a married couple. They learned each other's bodies, each other's rhythms, finding joy in the simple fact of being together. They made plans for spring, for summer, for the years stretching ahead. March brought the first thaw, water running down the mountainsides, icicles dripping from the eaves. The snow began to recede, revealing the brown earth underneath. Colton tapped the maple trees for syrup, and Willie learned to boil it down into sweet, sticky gold. The chickadees returned, their songs bright in the morning air. By early April, the trails were passable again. Colton and Willie packed up the furs he had gathered over the winter, loading them onto the two pack horses he kept in a small shelter behind the cabin. They would make the journey to Reno together, he decided. They would register their marriage officially, buy supplies for the summer, and return home. The journey took 5 days, following trails that wound through the mountains, descending gradually to the high desert where Reno sprawled in the valley. Willie rode one of the horses, side saddle in a split skirt she had made herself, while Colton walked alongside, leading the pack animals. They camped each night under the stars, making love by firelight, talking until sleep claimed them. Reno was loud and busy after months in the mountains, full of miners and railroad workers and gamblers. They registered their marriage at the courthouse, where a skeptical clerk looked at Willie's bruised wedding declaration from Jacob, before eventually accepting her story of annulment and recording her new marriage. Colton paid extra to have the documents filed with certainty, wanting no question about Willie's status. They bought supplies at the general store, luxuries they had gone without all winter. Coffee and sugar, flour and salt, needles and thread, ammunition, seeds for the garden Willie wanted to plant, chickens in crates to start a small flock, a milk cow that Colton led patiently through the town. They bought fabric for new clothes, a proper wedding ring for Colton to match the one Willie wore, books to add to their small library. In the evening, they checked into the hotel, a real luxury after the simple cabin. They bathed in hot water brought up by maids, washed their hair, scrubbed away months of mountain living. They ate dinner in the hotel restaurant, roast beef and potatoes and pie with fresh milk and real butter. But despite the luxury, they were both eager to leave. The noise and crowds pressed in on them after the silence of the mountains. They missed their cabin, their valley, their life. So on the sixth day, they began the journey home, their pack animals now loaded with supplies instead of furs, the cow plodding along behind. Willie sang as they traveled, happy songs her mother had taught her, and Colton joined in with his deeper voice. They were going home together to begin their life in earnest. The cabin looked small and perfect as they crested the final ridge and saw it below them in the valley. Smoke still rose from the chimney, a fire banked carefully before they left still smoldering. The garden plot Colton had prepared before the last snow was ready for planting. The mountains rose protectively around them, and the sky stretched endlessly blue overhead. "Home," Willie said softly. "Home," Colton agreed. They settled back into their routines, but now with new projects. The chickens needed a coop, which Colton built with careful attention to keep out predators. The cow needed a shelter and grazing area. The garden needed planting, and Willie spent days on her knees in the dirt, placing seeds in careful rows, dreaming of fresh vegetables in the summer. The addition to the cabin began, a second room that would serve as a bedroom, leaving the main space for living and cooking. Colton felled trees and shaped logs, and Willie helped where she could, learning to notch and fit to daub gaps with clay and moss. It was hard work, but satisfying, building their future with their own hands. Summer came, warm and bright. The garden flourished, producing more than they could eat, so Willie learned to preserve and pickle and can. The chickens laid eggs, and the cow gave milk, luxuries that made Willie feel rich. Colton hunted and fished, keeping them supplied with meat. They worked from dawn to dusk and fell into bed exhausted and happy. By late summer, Willie realized her monthly courses had not come. She waited another month to be certain, then told Colton one evening as they sat on the porch he had built, watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and purple. "We are going to have a baby," she said simply. Colton's face went through a dozen emotions in as many seconds. Joy, fear, wonder, worry. "Are you certain?" "As certain as I can be without a doctor, but yes. I believe I am about 3 months along. The baby should come in early spring." He pulled her onto his lap, cradling her against his chest. "Are you happy? I know after your marriage to Jacob, you said you could not bear to bring a child into that situation, but I hope this is different." "This is completely different," Willie assured him. "I am terrified and thrilled and so happy. You will be a wonderful father, Colton. I have no doubts about that." "I will try," he said hoarsely. "God, I will try so hard. I will love this child and you, and I will do everything in my power to keep you both safe. I know you will." They sat together as the stars came out, making new plans. The bedroom addition needed to be finished before winter. They would need a cradle, blankets, small clothes. Willie would need to conserve her strength as the pregnancy progressed. Let Colton take on more of the heavy work. "Boy or girl, which do you hope for?" Willie asked. "Healthy," Colton said immediately. "I care only that you both survive and are healthy." "If it is a boy, can we name him Thomas after your son?" Colton was quiet for so long that Willie thought she had overstepped, but then he nodded. "I would like that. And if it is a girl, maybe Sarah after your first wife. We can honor them together. Let your first family be remembered through your second." "You are remarkable," Colton said, kissing her temple. "Most women would be jealous of a first wife's memory." "I am not most women. And Sarah gave me a gift, even though she never knew me." She loved you first, made you the man you are. Our baby and I will benefit from that for the rest of our lives. The least I can do is honor her name." The fall was busy as they prepared for winter and the coming baby. The bedroom was finished and furnished, a proper bed frame built to hold a mattress stuffed with pine needles and soft grasses. The cradle Colton had been making was completed, carved with woodland animals and smoothed to perfection. Willie sewed blankets and small gowns, knitted caps and booties from wool she had traded for in Reno. Her belly swelled, and Colton treated her like she was made of spun glass. He insisted she rest more, would not let her lift anything heavy, worried constantly about her health. Willie endured his hovering with good grace, understanding that he was terrified of losing another wife and child. But privately, she felt strong and capable, her body designed for this work. Winter came again, their second together, but this one was different. They were truly married now, truly building a life. When snow buried the cabin, they were content to be trapped inside together, working on small projects, reading, talking, making love carefully as Willie's belly grew between them. She felt the baby move for the first time in January, a flutter like bird wings. Colton laid his large hand on her stomach and waited patiently until he felt it too, his face lighting up with wonder. After that, he talked to the baby constantly, telling stories, singing songs, making promises about the life they would build together. February was hard. Willie's back ached and her feet swelled. She could not get comfortable, could not sleep well. Colton rubbed her back and feet every night, patient and gentle despite his own worries. He had seen childbirth before, knew its dangers. Every day that Willie remained healthy was a gift. March brought the first signs of spring and the first signs of impending labor. Willie felt the tightening in her belly, irregular and mild at first, then growing stronger. They had discussed this moment extensively, planned for every contingency. Colton had studied every medical book he could find in Reno, had talked to midwives and doctors, had prepared supplies obsessively. The labor started in earnest on a bright morning when the first crocuses were pushing through the melting snow. Willie's water broke while she was making breakfast, and within an hour, the contractions were too strong to ignore. Colton guided her to the bedroom, helped her into the clean nightgown they had set aside for this purpose, and held her hand through each wave of pain. It was long, longer than either of them had expected. Hours blurred together, day turning to night and back to day again. Colton never left her side, supporting her when she needed to walk, holding her when she needed to rest, wiping her face with cool cloths, giving her sips of water and words of encouragement. "You are so strong," he told her over and over. "So brave, you can do this, I am here, I am not leaving." Willie clung to his words, to his solid presence, through the worst of the pain. She had never imagined anything could hurt this much, but she also had never felt stronger. She was bringing life into the world, creating a person from her own body. It was profound and terrible and beautiful all at once. Finally, as the second dawn broke over the mountains, Willie felt the overwhelming urge to push. Colton guided her through it, his medical research serving him well, his steady voice telling her when to push and when to breathe. And then, with one final tremendous effort, the baby was born, sliding into Colton's waiting hands. For a terrifying moment, there was silence. Then the baby drew breath and let out a lusty wail, and both parents burst into tears of relief. "A boy," Colton said, his voice shaking. "We have a son, Willie. A healthy, perfect son." He placed the baby on Willie's chest, and she looked down at the small, red, wrinkled face, overcome with love so fierce it hurt. The baby had dark hair like his father, but Willie's green eyes squinted up at her. He was perfect. He was theirs. "Thomas," she whispered. "Thomas Kincaid. "Welcome to the world, little one." Colton cut the cord with a clean knife, tied it off carefully, and delivered the afterbirth. He cleaned Willie gently, checked that she was not bleeding too heavily, then cleaned and swaddled the baby before placing him back in her arms. Only then did he allow himself to collapse onto the bed beside them, exhausted and elated. "You were amazing," he told Willie, kissing her sweaty forehead. "So strong, so brave. Thank you for this gift. Thank you for our son." "We made him together," Willie said, too tired to say more. They slept then, all three of them, curled together in the big bed. When they woke hours later, Thomas was hungry, and Willie learned to nurse him, awkward at first but quickly finding the rhythm. Colton watched with such love and wonder on his face that Willie felt tears prick her eyes again. This was everything she had dreamed of when she was a girl in Philadelphia, before Jacob, before the nightmare of that marriage. A loving husband, a baby, a home built with care and joy. It had just taken a winding path to get here, through snow and pain and fear. But every step had been worth it to arrive at this moment. The weeks after Thomas's birth were exhausting but joyful. Willie healed slowly, her body recovering from the trauma of childbirth. Colton took over all the household work, caring for her and the baby with tireless devotion. Thomas was a good baby, nursing well and sleeping in stretches long enough for his mother to rest. As spring turned to summer, Willie regained her strength. She strapped Thomas to her chest in a cradle board Colton had made, copying designs from the Shoshone, and went about her work in the garden. The baby seemed to enjoy being outside, watching the birds and the rustling leaves with wide eyes. Colton was a devoted father, talking to Thomas constantly, showing him everything, his large hands impossibly gentle with the tiny baby. He carved toys, sang songs, told stories. When Thomas cried, Colton walked him for hours, pacing the cabin or the valley beyond, his deep voice soothing. "He is going to be spoiled," Willie teased one evening, watching Colton hold the sleeping baby, clearly reluctant to put him down. "He deserves to be spoiled," Colton replied without apology. "He deserves to know every day that he is loved and wanted and cherished. He deserves better than I can give him, but I will spend my life trying anyway." Willie's heart melted. He has everything he needs right here. Loving parents, a safe home, space to grow. What more could any child want? Summer was busy with a baby to care for and a homestead to maintain. They fell into new rhythms, learning to work around Thomas's needs, taking turns so both could rest. It was exhausting but deeply fulfilling. By fall, Thomas was crawling, getting into everything, his personality emerging. He was fearless like his father, curious about everything, quick to laugh. He babbled constantly, making sounds that would eventually become words. The cabin felt full in the best way, alive with noise and activity. They celebrated Thomas's first birthday in March with cake Willie baked from their precious sugar and flour. The baby smashed it with his hands, delighted, getting more on his face than in his mouth. Colton took 100 mental pictures, memorizing every moment. "Can you believe it has been almost 2 years since I found you in the snow?" he said that night, after Thomas was asleep and they sat by the fire together. "It feels like a lifetime ago and yesterday all at once," Willie replied. "I was dying when you found me in more ways than one. You saved me." "You saved me right back," Colton said. "I was just existing up here, not living. You brought me back to life." They kissed soft and lingering, then Willie pulled back with a smile. "I have news. I am pregnant again." Colton's eyes went wide. "Already?" "Apparently we are very good at making babies," Willie said with a laugh. "I am about 2 months along, I think. The baby should come in late fall." "Are you happy?" Colton asked, searching her face. "So happy. Thomas should have siblings close in age. They will be companions for each other as they grow. And I love being a mother, love our life here. Yes, I am very happy. This pregnancy was easier than the first, Willie's body knowing what to do. She stayed active through the summer, working alongside Colton while Thomas toddled after them or napped in the shade. Her belly grew, and this time there was less fear, more anticipation. The baby came in October, 2 weeks early but healthy. Another boy, this one with Willie's lighter coloring but Colton's strong features. They named him Daniel, a name they both simply liked, no family connection needed. Daniel was calmer than Thomas, content to watch the world, thoughtful even as a baby. Thomas was fascinated by his new brother, wanting to touch him constantly, bring him toys, help in any way his toddler hands could manage. Colton built bunk beds for the boys' room, planning ahead for when they were older. The cabin felt full but not crowded, alive with the sounds of family. 3 years passed in a blur of diapers and laughter, scraped knees and first words, sleepless nights and perfect mornings. Thomas grew tall and strong, all lean muscle and boundless energy. Daniel was quieter but equally curious, his mind sharp and his questions endless. They played together in the valley, exploring under Colton's watchful eye, learning the mountains that were their home. Willie bloomed in motherhood, her earlier frailty replaced by strength. She could haul water, chop wood, shoot as well as Colton could. But she never lost her gentleness, her quick compassion, the soft heart that had survived so much hardship. Colton seemed to grow younger with each year, the lines of sorrow on his face smoothing, replaced by laugh lines at the corners of his eyes. He was a patient teacher, showing the boys everything, always ready to answer questions or play games or simply listen. When Thomas was 5 and Daniel was 3, Willie became pregnant again. This time, the baby was a girl born on a snowy December day. They named her Rose for the wild roses that grew in the valley each summer. She had dark hair and green eyes, and her father wrapped around her tiny finger from the first moment. "I am outnumbered now," Colton said, holding his daughter with such tenderness it made Willie's heart ache. 3 against 1. "You love it," Willie said, and he could not deny it. Rose was the last baby. After her birth, Willie's body made it clear it was done with childbearing. She was 33, Colton was 41, and they had 3 healthy children. It was more than enough, more than they had dared dream of when they first found each other. The years continued to pass, each one richer than the last. The boys learned to read and write from the books Willie taught them with. They learned to trap and hunt and survive in the wilderness from their father. Rose grew up wild and free, more comfortable in the woods than many grown men. She could outshoot both her brothers by the time she was 8, and she had her father's patience for tracking animals. They made the trip to Reno once a year, all 5 of them, to sell furs and buy supplies and visit civilization briefly. But they were always eager to return home, to their valley, to their mountain life. They had everything they needed in each other and the land they had built their life on. When Thomas was 10, a rider came up the mountain bringing news. Jacob Nash was dead, killed in a train accident outside of Cheyenne. The rider was a lawyer, settling the estate. Jacob had never remarried, never gotten over Willie's escape. He had died alone and bitter, leaving behind nothing but debts. Willie felt nothing when she heard. That part of her life was so distant it might have happened to someone else. She was Winona Kincaid now, through and through. Jacob Nash was just a name, a man who had once hurt her but no longer had any power in her life. She asked the lawyer to check the records, to confirm her annulment and remarriage were properly recorded. He did, and assured her everything was legal and binding. Willie was free in every sense of the word. She had been for years, but now it was official. Jacob's death meant he could never come back, never threaten her family. It was a final closing of that chapter. That night, she and Colton sat on their porch, watching the stars. The children were asleep inside, safe and warm. "How do you feel?" Colton asked, holding her hand. "Free," Willie said simply. "I have been free since the day you found me in the snow, but now it is complete. That life is over. This life is everything." "This life is everything," Colton agreed, pulling her close. They sat in comfortable silence. Two people who had found each other against all odds, who had built something beautiful from broken pieces. The mountains stood eternal around them, the stars wheeled overhead, and inside the cabin their children slept peacefully, secure in the knowledge that they were loved. The years continued their march. Thomas grew tall and broad like his father, a natural outdoorsman with a quick mind and steady hands. Daniel was more scholarly, always reading, always asking questions, talking about maybe becoming a teacher someday. Rose was fearless and stubborn, determined to prove she could do anything her brothers could do and usually succeeding. When Thomas turned 18, he took a job as a guide for hunters wanting to explore the mountains, earning his own money, starting to build his own life. Daniel helped his mother in the garden and with the preserving, his careful nature perfect for the detailed work. Rose, at 15, was already the best tracker in the family, often ranging far into the wilderness on expeditions that gave her mother gray hair. Willie and Colton aged together, their hair going silver, their movements a bit slower, but their love never diminishing. They still sat together every evening, still talked for hours, still reached for each other in the night. They had built something that would outlast them, a family and a home that would carry on. One evening, as they sat watching the sunset, Willie turned to Colton. "Do you ever regret it? Coming to the mountains, leaving civilization behind?" "Not once," he said immediately. "This is where I was meant to be, where we were meant to be. I was meant to walk barefoot through the snow so you would find me, perhaps. Or perhaps we were always going to find each other one way or another. The snow was just the way it happened." He squeezed her hand. "I would do it all again. Every moment, every hardship, every joy. It all led to this." "To this," Willie agreed, looking at their cabin, at the smoke rising from the chimney, at the life they had built with their own hands and fierce determination. The children grew and eventually left to build their own lives, though none went far. Thomas built a cabin 5 miles north, bringing his own bride home to the mountains. Daniel went to Reno to teach but returned every summer, unable to stay away from the mountains for long. Rose married a Shoshone man and lived with his people, bridging 2 worlds, fluent in 2 languages, belonging everywhere. Willie and Colton became grandparents, then great-grandparents, their family tree spreading and branching. The valley filled with cabins as their descendants stayed close, drawn to the land and the life it offered. They became the patriarch and matriarch of a small mountain community, respected and loved. As they grew truly old, their children and grandchildren made sure they were cared for. Thomas and his sons took over the trap lines. Daniel's daughters helped with the garden and the preserving. Rose brought medicine when they were sick and sat with them for hours, listening to the stories of how it all began. Willie's hair went completely white, and her hands grew gnarled with age, but her green eyes never lost their spark. Colton's broad shoulders stooped, and his powerful muscles faded, but his protective nature never wavered. He still watched over his family with fierce devotion, still loved Willie with his whole heart. On a clear autumn day, when the aspens had turned gold and the air was crisp with the promise of winter, Willie and Colton sat together on their porch. They were both in their 80s now, ancient by frontier standards, blessed by God or luck or both. "You remember the day we met?" Colton asked, his voice still deep despite his years. "Every detail," Willie said. "The cold, the pain, the despair. Then you appeared like something out of a legend, so big and strong, I thought I was hallucinating. You were the most beautiful thing I had ever seen, even half frozen and terrified. Liar. I was a mess." "You were beautiful," he insisted. "You still are." They sat in silence, holding hands, watching their valley as the sun set. Around them, smoke rose from a dozen chimneys. Children played in the clearings between cabins. Their legacy surrounded them, lives that would never have existed if Colton had not heard Willie's cry that winter day so many years ago. "I love you," Willie said softly. "I have loved you from the moment you gave me your boots." "I love you," Colton replied. "I loved you from the moment I saw you refusing to give up, fighting to survive." They watched the stars come out, one by one, sitting together as they had done for 50 years. And when morning came, they were still sitting there, peaceful and still, hands clasped, together until the very end as they had been through life. Their children found them that way and wept, but through their tears they smiled. Because Willie and Colton had lived a love story for the ages, had built a family and a community, had shown everyone around them what it meant to truly love and be loved. They had saved each other in the snow all those years ago and had continued saving each other every day after. The family buried them together on a hill overlooking their valley, under a tall pine where they used to sit on summer evenings. Their headstone was simple: Colton and Winona Kincaid, together always. And the story of the mountain man who saw a woman walking barefoot in the snow, gave her his boots, and carried her to safety became family legend, told and retold to each new generation. The story of how great-grandmother and great-grandfather met, fell in love, and built a dynasty in the mountains. The story of how love, real love, could save and transform and endure beyond any hardship. Their cabin still stood, maintained by their descendants, a shrine to the love that had started everything. And on cold winter nights, when the wind howled through the mountains, people swore they could hear Willie's laughter and Colton's deep voice, still together, still happy, still home in the mountains they had made their own. The valley filled with life in the years that followed. Thomas's son built a general store to serve the growing community. Daniel's grandchildren established a school, ensuring that education continued. Rose's descendants brought knowledge of the land that enriched everyone. The community thrived, bound together by blood and history, and the examples of Willie and Colton. Every year on the anniversary of that snowy December day when everything began, the family gathered at the graveside. They told the story again, making sure the youngest children understood where they came from, what their great-great-grandparents had overcome. They talked about the importance of kindness, of seeing someone in need and acting without hesitation. They talked about true love, the kind that lasted, that built rather than destroyed. The legend grew beyond the family, spreading through the mountain communities. The story of Colton Kincaid, the mountain man who gave his boots to a barefoot stranger and carried her through the snow. The story of Winona Nash, who survived her first marriage and found true love in the wilderness. The story of two broken people who healed each other and built something beautiful. Their love story became a touchstone, something people held onto in hard times. When marriages struggled, elders would tell them about Willie and Colton, about choosing each other every day. When young people doubted they would find love, grandmothers would smile and say the right person was worth waiting for, worth walking through snow to find. When someone needed help, the mountain people would remember Colton giving his boots without hesitation and try to show the same immediate compassion. The mountains themselves seemed to hold the memory. The valley where their cabin stood was known as Kincaid Valley, and people said it had a special feeling, like love had soaked into the very ground. The trail where Colton found Willie was marked with a simple wooden sign, "The Path Home." Young couples hiked it on their wedding days, hoping for a marriage as strong as Willie and Colton's. The story endured because it was true, because it had really happened. Two people had found each other at their lowest moments and lifted each other up. They had chosen love over fear, partnership over solitude, hope over despair. And in doing so, they had created something that would outlast them by generations, a legacy of love that would never be forgotten. On cold winter nights, when snow fell soft and silent over the mountains, you could almost see them. A broad-shouldered man carrying a woman in his arms, her feet tucked in his two large boots, walking toward a warm cabin and a future neither had dared dream of. Walking toward home. Walking toward love. Walking toward everything that mattered, and if you listened carefully, you could hear Willie's voice, warm and certain. "Thank you for finding me." And Colton's reply, steady and true. "Thank you for being worth finding." Together always, in the mountains they loved, in the family they built, in the story that would never end. The mountain man saw her walking barefoot in snow, and everything changed. He gave her his boots and carried her the rest of the way, not just that day, but every day after, in all the ways that mattered. And she carried him too, through grief and loneliness, into joy and purpose and life renewed. They saved each other, loved each other, and built a forever that would echo through the mountains for all time.